I'm Tammy Van Dunge, your host for Executive with a Cause. Today on the show, I welcome Martin Fisk, the CEO of Menslink. Today, we're going to chat about the good, bad, and hard things about running a charity. Martin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tammy. Thank you for having me.
So we met a number of years ago when I was working for another charity. And the way I remember it is that we were going through some hard times in the media, and you reached out to me out of the blue and said, "Let's have a coffee." And that was so meaningful to me at that moment because the CEO role, as you know, can be quite lonely. And, sometimes you need that peer support, which is not always readily available. So I really appreciate it at that time. And it's been great to see all the work that you're doing these days.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're right. Being a CEO, particularly in the community sector, can be very, very lonely. And sometimes when tough times happen, because they will, you make a mistake or something happens to one or many of your clients or one of your sponsors or whatever. And that can just feel devastating. And of course, the media will want to pile on with bad things. I remember when I went through a tough time, a couple of community sector leaders just rang up and said, "Hey, is there anything we could do?
Mm.
Can we, buy you a coffee or something?" So the more of us do that, the less we feel alone. And I think that's better for everyone.
Well, for those people that are not familiar with Men's Link, can you tell us more about the organization?
So Menslink is a charity based here in Canberra, and we are 20 years old this year. And for the last 20 years, we have been helping young guys through the tough times in their life. Loneliness, bullying, disability, mental health issues, suicide, drug abuse, family violence, and getting them through those tough times with the least amount of harm to themselves and those around them. Unfortunately, while many men are in a privileged position compared to women, for a fairly significant cohort, they struggle. And when young men in particular struggle, they can tend to be very violent to other people. And the crime statistics, both in youth detention and the adult prison system, show this. And of course, when things go badly wrong, they can also show up very prominently in suicide statistics. So suicide remains the leading cause of death for young men, all the way up to 44 years of age.
Wow.
It kills more young men than the road toll and skin cancer combined.
It's incredible statistics. So 20 years ago, were those problems similar or were they, it feels like things are getting harder. Is that just perception or was it just as bad back then when they started this organization?
I think things were obviously not good because otherwise, Richard Shanahan would not have founded Menslink 20 years ago. But I think challenges that young men, young people, all of us face can be very amplified by the online world that so many of us live in. But one of the things that they discovered, so Menslink had programs within another more broader umbrella community organisation, but they found that young men didn't seek help, not necessarily because they didn't want to, but they didn't have what they felt was a safe place that understood guy stuff, for want of a better word. So they started Menslink to be a safe place for young guys to come and talk to someone in a non-judgmental, understanding way. And it's just grown from strength to strength to strength from there.
So how did you get involved in the organization?
So I was in a position in my life where I was looking for a change. I wanted to get closer to serving and helping people. And I thought, I might do something really mad and join the community sector. But I didn't know what the community sector was. I'd volunteered for charities and done fundraising and board, but I didn't really understand the sector. And so I put the word out to the universe, and a friend of mine said, "Hey, check these Menslink people out. They've got a job as CEO." And I thought, don't really know about the community sector, but I do know how to be a CEO. I've done that before. I've run my own business and grown it, and done all of that sort of stuff. And I rang up the then CEO, my predecessor, and I said, "Oh, could we just have a chat?" And we had a coffee. 2 hours later, I went, "Wow, this is the organisation for me." I'd had a significant number of challenges when I was a teenager, and like so many teenagers going through challenges, I thought I was the only one. And so I suffered in silence. Mental health in the 1980s was absolutely stigmatised. You did not talk about it, ever. And I thought, wow, if somewhere like Menslink was available when I was a kid, it could have turned my life around quite significantly. Now, the upside that there wasn't, and I went down to rock bottom, which then gave me the lived experience to be able to reapply that to Menslink. And I joined Menslink in 2011, so that was a little over 11 years ago, and I've never looked back.
And it's a very prominent community organization. Like in Canberra, Menslink is well known for what it does. It's actually interesting because this week is, while we're recording this, is Are You Okay Day, I suppose, not week. But that mental health has become more and more a topical subject that people are more willing to talk about. In the time that you've been at Menslink, I'm interested to know not only how has that ability to talk more openly about mental health changed your organization, but also how has the operations changed to support it?
So I think there have been a range of organisations, including ours, which have been at the forefront of changing people's perception. And I think it's important when we talk about mental health is to include the concept of mental fitness, because for so many people, let alone young guys, they don't have a mental illness per se, a diagnosable mental illness, but they are really struggling. Why? Often because of the external events. So we've taken the approach of let's talk about these external events. And I think young guys very much externalize, it's my mum, it's the kids at school, it's my former girlfriend, it's my boss, it's whatever that are causing them deep distress. And if we can help them talk about that, we can start to reframe those mindsets that they have so that they don't fall into a deep hole of potential mental illness. But I think there's so much work that all of us can do in terms of holding them up. Now, how do we do that? We do that through school education programs. We do that through professional counselling, and we do that through volunteer mentoring. Now, when I started, we were tiny. We had one part-time counsellor. We had not a huge amount more than a handful of volunteer mentors. And so one of the things that I knew is that we had to grow our organisation to be able to meet the demand that I knew was out there. They weren't necessarily coming to Menslink, but I knew young guys were struggling. And I knew that through the lived experience of pretty much everyone I've spoken to, and you could just see it in newspaper stories and things like that. And so I think the challenge was getting support for a young guy would never be cool. You know, it's not cool to go, do you know what? I'm really struggling. My girlfriend's dumped me. My boss hates me. I'm about to get fired. Or, you know, that's not really cool. But if we could get it to a level where it was okay. And so a few things I did is obviously worked on a funding increase, but I also organised to get the Canberra Raiders, which is our local football team, involved in promoting a campaign to schools to say it's okay to have hassles, but it's not okay to stay silent about it. And that had an incredible effect of just people going, you know what, yeah, it's okay to talk about this stuff. And importantly, you might be feeling the worst you've ever felt in your life today. But tomorrow you might be all right. Or next year you might be all right once you get through this hurdle. Rather than, you know, as young guys can often feel, or all young people, including us adults, what you're feeling now, you're always going to feel. So you go, there's no way out of this hole. But having an adult, and sometimes it might need to be a professional, sometimes it might just need to be a volunteer going, you know what, I did that. Here's how I got out of it, and you make your own choice as to how you want to do that. And I'm a big believer in the mentoring that we do at Menslink and just mentoring in general.
The mental fitness versus mental health discussion we also had with Heidi Prouse a few episodes ago. So from MEACT. And it's really interesting because we don't talk about mental fitness, do we? It's all about mental health, mental health, mental health. I think the idea of bringing in people like the Raiders that these young men would already respect because they look up to these professional athletes is such a great idea for other organizations to think about how they can impact their constituents and make it not cool, but okay. I'm interested in knowing more about, you know, like you said, when you started, it was such a small organization with only one part-time counselor. How many employees did you have total then versus what you have now? And also your reach. How many people, how many young men were you helping then versus how many you're impacting now?
So when I started, there were 4 of us, and I was the only full-time employee. Now there are around 15 of us, and many, many full-time employees. Um, and in terms of young guys directly impacted, we have increased that by 10 times. And more importantly, with our education campaigns, we're now reaching tens of thousands of young guys. And in our group programs, where we'll get, 10 or 20 odd young guys talking about mental fitness and values and purpose in their life and being the best version of yourself you can be, and acknowledging the pain that they've probably gone through in their childhoods. We're reaching hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of young guys every year, because not every young guy wants to sit in a room with someone and open up their deepest, darkest secrets. That can be scary. So one of the things we did is went, okay, wherever we've kind of worked, it's like, what are the cohorts that we're not reaching? Right? The squeaky wheels are always going to get help, right? Whether it's from us or any other organisation. What about, and I remember a teacher telling me this, it's the grey kids that nobody sees. And they're actually the ones that can often be at most risk. So, we went out on a limb quite a few years ago and, really worked out how do we reach some of those kids.
To go from 4 to 15 employees, though, as you say, would require additional funding. How has your funding changed through that time?
So when I started, we had, and we've grown our funding, I think, about 5 times. we were 99% government funded. I remember in my first financial year, I think we got $2,000 in donations. Last financial year, we probably topped over $1 million, even during COVID.
From government or from?
No, sorry, that's just private sector.
Okay.
And philanthropic donations.
Okay.
At the same time, we also increased government funding. And one of the propositions that we were able to take to government, because government is, while it's a decreasing component of our funding, it's the anchor. We cannot do with, we can manage without a sponsor. We couldn't manage without the ACT government. They are absolutely a critical anchor point for our whole organisation. But what I did to government is I said, I think we can achieve some efficiencies, basically through economies of scale, right? We had a bunch of fixed costs. What I had a lot of flexibility was in variable costs. And I said, if you give us an increase in funding, and I think at the time it was like, give us 15% more, I will actually deliver back to government 40% more output. And we did. How? Through those economies of scale in the back end, but also we would go to government and business and say, look, what if we had a partnership? For every dollar I get from government, I'll contribute, I'll make sure we fundraise from business. And I would say to business, you're now in a partnership with the ACT government. And I think, having the community sector, Menslink, a business organisation and the government all working together in a three-way partnership is probably one of the best models I've ever seen.
The matching donation with government funding, I know has been very successful for others as well. I want to unpack the economies of scale a little bit. Like, what exactly do you mean by when you went to government and you said, look, if you provide this additional increase of funding, we can actually be more efficient? How did that actually work?
So I knew that we had some fixed costs in the organisation. We had, all the usuals, rent and utilities and all of that. The cost of a non-delivery CEO and admin. So, for I think the first 5 years of operation of Menslink, I was everything. There were no admin people. And what I was able to do is go, okay, and there's some pretty easy budgeting techniques you can use and modelling. But I went, okay, so we've got these fixed costs. If I then and for these fixed costs, we look after X number of clients. But if I took this extra money from government and put it all into increased frontline, the percentage of overhead starts dropping.
Yeah.
So, when I can't tell you exactly, but, I think our admin and overhead costs, may have been like, 30, 40% when I arrived. We got them down to like, 18% or less. And that's how you do that sort of stuff. But you've got to know your costs. You've got to know where the money is going. You need to have a firm grasp. I always talk about being a CEO of a charity. It's somebody with a heart who loves spreadsheets. And maybe that's the difference between a service delivery person and the sort of CEO and some of us financy types.
Well, let's talk about that, because on your website, you actually specifically say down to the dollar, how much does it cost to deliver the programs you deliver for each individual? That is not an easy calculation. We had David Hubbard was a guest from Cinch Transform. He's an accountant that helps NDIS clients with their cash flow and budgeting and things like that. And we talked specifically about everything from utilization rates and making sure that your staff that were frontline delivering as fully as they could. And also just about how, depending on the type of cash that's coming in the door, it may be that you're having to be reimbursed in that case versus having this ongoing grant funding too. So how do you actually calculate this individual cost per client?
Um, I actually didn't find it too difficult. And one of the ways in which I did that is so many organizations separate out head office or yeah, and yeah, Menslink is one office, right? So we have we're a fairly simple structure, which does make it a lot easier than a big national organization. But one of the things I did is a lot of organizations, I think, make the um, error, not really an error, but they view overheads as different. Whereas I went, actually, in order to deliver a counselling session to a young man, that needs a counsellor. But the counsellor also has to be paid for note writing, downtime, professional development, supervision, the cost of payroll. All of these things actually go into that counselling session. So it doesn't, in my mind, make any sense to say, well, we'll take away all the finance and admin people and cost them separately. No, they're an integral part of that counselling service because you could not provide that counselling service without it. So I just worked out basically, how much money each year does it cost us to run? And I only do this on a yearly basis. How much money does it cost us to run the whole shebang? Then we break it down into frontline delivery costs as a percentage of the whole. So, we have X number of counsellors plus X number of direct costs associated with that counselling delivery service. So they represent, I'm making these numbers up, but 42% of our costs. And then I allocate all those costs according to the major chunks of the business. Then within each major chunk of the business, we might allocate it to individual programs. Again, based on, and we look at how much time cost is spent on each program. So I have a very good handle on the percentage costs of each program for the whole. And then it's just a matter of going, how many clients did we support each year? Now, we've tracked those numbers from 2006 all the way through to 2022. So I can tell you every year what it cost to service an individual client. I can tell you every year what percentage the government paid, what percentage the private sector paid, or philanthropic donations. I can, we've got this model that we can cut and slice, very, very many ways. And I got to tell you, it's all done on an Excel spreadsheet. We have no fancy, anything fancier than that to do it.
I could probably help you with something a little prettier, at least.
Are you having a go at my spreadsheet skills?
No, of course. The interesting thing, though, is, as you were saying, you're becoming more efficient. So did you see the cost of delivering the programs actually going down over time because of these efficiencies?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Up to around about March the 15th, 2020, COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just shot to bits.
And how did COVID change your delivery model?
So it changed everything in Menslink. So we were lucky that we could pivot from a counselling perspective to online pretty quickly. Volunteer mentoring was a little bit more difficult because, you've got 100 volunteers in homes and all sorts of things. But one of the really interesting challenges that we didn't see coming initially, we kind of had a bit of a reluctance to online, but what we found is the young guys hated it.
Really?
And this was not necessarily just our experience. This was also the experience of other youth delivery services here in Canberra and quite possibly further afield as well. And I think the reason is they love online for entertainment, but counseling's actually kind of work. And like they don't like online schooling, they don't like online counselling. The other issue we found was that privacy was a huge issue. We had, a number of our young guys live in challenging home environments and, they don't get a soundproof room like this. They're in their bedroom with their, younger sister or younger brother listening in on the door. We had a mum interrupt what we thought was a private counselling session. And so this poor young guy, every word he said, his mum was listening in. So he's never going to say anything. So we found that quite difficult. Clearly, from a fundraising perspective, it just went from there to there. And that's continued for a bit. I think businesses have actually struggled this year, even though the so-called the economy has opened up. There have been a lot of constraints on that. But what we found is during lockdown, the ACT government were fantastic, and the federal government as well with JobKeeper, and they kept us going.
Were there any things that you changed during COVID that you're going to continue to keep in your service delivery?
No. We'll keep a readiness for bad things happening. But what we found is humans are people-oriented. This conversation wouldn't be nearly as good if you were sitting here and I was sitting in my room in Tuggeranong. We'd still have a chat, but, you're smiling at me now. And, I remember having an appointment with my own psychologist during lockdown, and we get along really well. I'm a long-term regular client, and we both just sat there, and it's kind of weird because you've got the person you're talking to, but then you've got this little picture of yourself. I'm looking okay. You can't help it. And I find everybody does that. So we'll connect with young people online, but in terms of actually having those deep conversations, they're not that good, and I'm not sure that's really going to change. We've got 60,000 years of evolution. That's not really going to change.
Well, I think because in so many communities in Australia, not just Canberra, the lockdowns had prevented us from reaching out and touching people and having these face-to-face conversations for so long that our desire for connection is, for many people, is even higher than it was pre-COVID. We took it for granted and now we want it back. So I could completely understand in that environment, especially the ones where they just don't have the privacy, as you say,
Mm-hmm.
and to just see body language, right?
Yes, exactly. I can't remember what the statistics that Daniel Goleman, emotional intelligence, puts forward, but the massive amount of communication that doesn't come out of your mouth. Yeah.
Yeah. I also noticed that you are getting some help from the University of Canberra to do some data analysis for I think it's around your outcomes specifically. A lot of organizations measure success by the number of clients they service, and you have talked about that as being one of your KPIs. But from an outcome perspective, it's often hard to measure in the community service how beneficial your programs are. So how have you been able to utilize other data other than the number of people that you serve?
From the time I started, I really wanted to know that we were making a difference. And to me, making a difference wasn't whether somebody liked our program. Because actually, we could run the most popular community service for young men in the country if we transformed everything into, multi gigabit Ethernet into the internet and just had free Xboxes and did all that, right? So what outcomes did we want to achieve? So I had the immense privilege of meeting Dr. James Neal, who's an associate professor of psychology in the University of Canberra. And I said, I want to measure, are we making a hill of beans difference? So I don't want to know if the young guys thought the program was great. Clearly I do, because that's important to make sure we've got a program designed that meets their immediate needs and wants them coming back. But I want to know, particularly after the fact, have we changed some of the things that we're in business for? Have we improved mental health outcomes? Have we reduced the amount of damage to others? So have we reduced violence in the home, aggression in the home? What about aggression in the school? What about aggression in the workplace? Have we had an impact on anger management for those kids who are socially isolated and really at risk? Have we improved their connectedness with their family, with their school classmates, with their peers, outside of that? Have we improved respect for women? Now, we thought asking young kids that, we're either not going to get any response, or we'll get a kind of a skewed response. Yeah, I'm great. Or no, I'm still hopeless. So what we did is we deliberately asked school teachers or youth workers or people involved with the kids at school and their mums. So we could actually have a relatively independent, observable behaviour. And so we engaged the University of Canberra to do a bit of a longitudinal study. So going back to young guys who are now over 18 or their parents if they were under 18, for clients maybe 10 years back, to say how have they done during the time they were with Menslink and then subsequently. And out of that, we then developed a kind of a model that we were then able to take, and we survey mums and schools and young guys now over 18 every 6 months on 13 personal and social indicators to see if we're making a difference. Because frankly, if we're not making a difference, we either need to change the program, stop the program because maybe it's been effective and no longer is, or do something different. And for me, those two and a couple of others, documents of what are our unit costs and what are our outcomes, that's the way we kind of run the business.
To take a qualitative measure and turn it into something you can quantify is not actually that easy. So can you provide one example of maybe one of your KPIs that you measure for outcomes specifically when you do these interviews with the mums and the teachers that gives you an indication of change?
So the obvious one would be ability to control anger and aggression. And we use a 10-point scale, and say in our mentoring program, we track that from every 6 months in the 2 or more year journey that the young guy has with us. And that's how we do it.
And so would that be like some definitions of what 1 looks like, some definitions of what 10 looks like, and then you have this input to say that these are, I suppose, expressions of anger?
So one of the early pieces of advice from Dr. James Neal was that because I looked at some of these things and went, oh, no, we need to define this. We need to, and he said, the more simple you make your survey, the more likely it is you're going to get results. The longer survey or the more complicated you make it and the more definitions you put, the more likely you're going to get really significant dropout. And in his opinion, and this is, his lifelong work, he said, get the data. Getting, as a statistician, getting lots of data and working with it is better than having a tiny amount of data that's perfect. So that was a really useful piece of advice because I said, us asking these questions, it's not really that good. We should have, this and this and this. And he said, no, actually having something really simple that's consistent is really useful. And realistically, you and I could answer the same survey and we could have a 10-page booklet on all the definitions and stuff, and it'd still be a subjective response because we're people, But what we're doing is we're sampling a larger number of people, and so that's giving us some statistical quality, if you like.
And I suppose when you're doing it over time, it's actually more valuable anyways, right? Like you're not necessarily looking at an individual at any point in time. You're looking for trends.
Yeah, everything. So obviously people have the option of saying, well, I'm this school or I'm talking about my son, Martin, but other people can go anonymous. We do have the risk that sometimes, particularly in counselling, sometimes in mentoring, mum and the young guy might have a very different view of what success looks like. And so sometimes we will get some negative feedback from a mum that maybe doesn't correspond to our view of life, and it's often about the young man wanting independence. That can be a bit challenging in some families, but we still put those negative results in our surveys because that's genuine data, and you've got to take the good with the bad. Like all CEOs and my program managers and everything, we'll get 50 good responses and I'll be awake all night with the one negative one going, what did we do wrong? And I think that's a challenge in the community sector. Somebody once told me that it's the best job in the world with some of the worst days. And I think that's a really good thing to remember as a community sector worker, that you're going to have some crushing days. And sometimes it'll be your fault. Sometimes it'll just be that stuff has happened. But that will only be a day and it will change and get better again. But sometimes you have dark days.
I would agree with that. I used to say I had the best job in the world, but there were definitely some days that were hard. Definitely some days. I'm curious to know, with all this data that you have, and especially the outcome data, how have you used that to either for fundraising or to inform program decisions? How have you used that data to benefit the organization?
So we use it a lot in fundraising, just by publicising it, websites and social media and stuff like that. But we also use it to build our community. Most, not individual service instances, but most of our service delivery is done by volunteers. We've got 15 staff, but we've got 100 volunteers doing stuff for the organisation. And for a potential volunteer to come in and go, okay, they're making a difference, therefore I can make a difference. Because not many people want to volunteer and not achieve an outcome. And so having that's probably more important than the fundraising, is actually making sure our community of potential volunteers go, okay, this is cool. And, every time we do these every 6 months, and it's not only statistical data, but it's also we ask schools and parents to write us a little thing, which we also publish. But I get all the staff together on some of our staff meetings, and I read out the statistics and some of the comments, because our staff, community sector workers are paid way less than, anybody except for aged care and childcare. And having them go, wow, here's this feedback from a mum whose life we changed. Here's this feedback from a school who've said, we have never had a program in here like this one. That's just really important to help build that sense of purpose, to build that sense of community. We also use the data just to look how we're doing as a program. How are we tracking? Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? And not just like you can have a 6-month dip, that's, but, realistically year on year, are we doing better? Are we not doing so good? What might be the reasons for that?
There's two thoughts based on information you just gave me. But one of them was on your website. You actually had some pretty significant figures as the impact to the community when men are struggling with these issues, and especially young men. Like, there was statistics about how it the cost to the community financially. How do you come up with those numbers, or was that from another study?
Yeah, they're independent studies that have come up with the cost of a for want of a better word, a career criminal, or somebody who's a recidivist who goes back to jail a number of times. I mean, jail costs somewhere between $200 and $500 a day. Direct taxes. Drug addicts cost an enormous amount. But here's the thing. Let's take a young man who has been traumatized in his early life, and then through his teenage years and in his younger years, he starts to learn that violence works, because he's learnt that from his parents, predominantly dad. He's then learnt that through, every movie he's ever watched, and, all of his online, first-person shooter games and all of that stuff. And he's learned it out in the streets. So he is now a person who is starting to form this, if anything goes wrong in my life, I'm going to be violent. Now that's affecting him, but it's also affecting his younger brother, his older sister, mum, classmates at school. He goes into the workplace and people are just avoiding him because you never know when he's going to blow up. He may have 3 or 4 partners in his life. What if he's violent to them? What if he has kids and he's violent to them? Now, I've just listed maybe 20 or 30 people who are inherently damaged because this young man wasn't turned around. What if we could turn that young man around, and we do, and stop it at the source? We've not just affected his life, but all the way down the track. I mean, we have young man after young man after young man who are now in their late 20s and even early 30s who were violent in their teenage years, or even as young as 10, which is why they came to Menslink in the first place. They're now married. They've got kids. We talk to their wives and their partners, and they're not violent. I had to tell you, we tell those stories, and it's just a fantastic outcome, not just for the young man, but their community.
And to be able to measure some of that is probably the missing link for a lot of organizations when they try to measure those outcomes. So it's great that you just shared some examples of how you do that. Before we run out of time, when we were talking before the show began, we were discussing boards specifically and risk appetite. And it's something that is not actually talked about very often in any boardroom setting that I've been in, to be honest. I'd like to know more about your views on that and how you've actually managed the risk appetite of your board.
So I work for a wonderful board, but specifically board chair, who a long time ago sent me on a Institute of Company Directors course. And one of the things that I learned, and he's also a graduate and things like that, but was about, in order to manage risk in your organisation, you have to understand what risk the organisation is prepared to put up with. Now, so many people blithely come at, absolutely can't accept that risk. I come back to them and say, if that is your position, we should not deliver services to young men. Do you want to do that? No. Okay, so the chair and we've got some absolutely fantastic directors, both past and present, who worked on our risk appetite, which is what are we prepared to do in order to deliver the outcomes that I've spoken about for young men? Because to have no risk would be not to deliver services, because inherently, as soon as you get two humans in a room, there's a risk, or in a car, or in a, we take them camping and we do all sorts of stuff. So we took the board on a journey of actually defining the risk, and we review this every year, with new board members and everything like that. And then myself and our general manager and our senior leadership team, every year, and then, updates throughout the year, but we will spend a half to a full day. It's really exciting stuff, I tell you now. Half to a full day going through, okay, risk appetite, each and every risk we can think of. Are the controls we have in place to prevent, mitigate, reduce that risk, do they align with the risk appetite that the board set us? And are we comfortable? Some of the risks, are there no matter what we do. But are our controls enough to really minimise that risk to, maybe what would be that level of risk for that young man on the street anyway?
So in my mind, you're talking specifically about operational risk. There's also financial risk. There's also political risk. There's also things like IT risk, which I rarely see managed properly within these organizations.
All of those.
Yeah.
So, what are the financial ratios beyond which we would be very uncomfortable? What are the IT risks? Privacy is a huge issue. How do we, spread IT risk, for example? All of those things.
Have you seen over time, I don't know how often your chair has changed. Have you seen over time that appetite changes with the chair specifically?
No, because we only introduced it with the new chair, who has been in the job for more than 6 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Because I've personally experienced it with a change of chair has impacted that risk appetite, whether it's policy advocacy, whether it's financial, and even me, I'm on the board for a not-for-profit right now, and I wasn't comfortable with the fact that the financial risk appetite was not defined.
Yeah.
It wasn't defined. I'm like, no, we got to have so much in the bank in case there's an emergency, and this is what we do. So that was documented. Not everybody thought that was necessary, but it is actually necessary.
It is necessary, yeah.
So, it's interesting to talk about risk appetite because I don't think enough people really qualify it and quantify it.
And I think one of the reasons it's so important is to avoid two things. One is and they're both maybe very related, but death by 1,000 cuts. So in the example you gave about, what is the level of financial reserve we must have? And, we've gone deeper in, what sort of investment does that need to be in and all of those sort of things. But what can happen is people go, oh, we're fine. We've got so many reserves. We're cool. Whoa, we got no money. We didn't see this event coming, so now we've got no money. But if you have it's X% of, last quarter's expenses, then they know. And, I would expect the CEO to be reporting on that. Yep, we're kind of getting to within 10%. Okay, what are we going to do? And what do we do might be, okay, this is clearly short-term. We'll change the risk appetite. But there's a conscious decision rather than an unconscious decision. But on the other side, what I see happen without a clearly defined risk appetite is, and I can see this happening quite often in government, anytime anything goes wrong, we've got to stop that happening ever again. Right. And, I talk to people in government that, in order to take kids out on a really simple outing, there's pages and pages of risk management stuff and it's all this. And it's like, because of, one incident of happened ages ago, and I'm not discounting the bad things that happen and the trauma and all of that sort of stuff. I've been there myself. But if every time something bad happens, we have a knee-jerk reaction to that one incident, you get to a situation where it becomes too hard to do anything. But if you have a risk appetite that said, sometimes things are going to go wrong, but we're not going to change the whole of the program to always bounce around and manage those bad things, because I think that is also a death by 1,000 cuts. And all of a sudden you get something that you never intended.
So one little thing that I did to try to get the board to not do that was to instigate a internal review of any incident.
Yes.
Right? I don't know if you've incorporated that. Probably
we
your
do.
thing.
Absolutely.
It's the simplest thing, isn't it? To actually say, let's have somebody who wasn't involved in the incident, a senior manager or whoever, to actually do a review and identify where we failed to do certain things. Things we should have predicted, but also to recognize that, in the delivery of services, you're taking risk every day.
Yeah. We provide, as part of our regular board papers, a de-identified incident register. So every board meeting, and it's a specific agenda item, standing agenda item, the board goes through the incident register. And these can be incidents that realistically have nothing to do with Menslink, but they're one of our clients, or it might be an accident, or it might be a mistake or a fault of something, a system or something that's happened. And having the board have not only visibility of that, but visibility over time, and then a discussion. Again, always with that risk appetite in mind. I think that's critical.
There are a number of IT systems that can track that for people, but the smaller the organization, it's really unnecessary. A spreadsheet, as you say, is as simple as that, to recognize these incidents that you're assuming you don't have to put in an insurance claim for, because obviously that requires something else. But for those other incidents that are not related to insurance claims, a simple spreadsheet is just the easiest way to track this.
Yeah. One of the things that was interesting, one of our board members said, by having visibility of the incident register, they got a much more in-depth view of some of the real challenges our young men face. All de-identified, but we unfortunately, like so many people in the community sector, we deal with some of the worst of human behaviours, and actually having a board that goes, wow, it starts to give them empathy for what the staff and even our volunteers are going through, let alone our clients and their families.
Well, there's so many good things about doing that, but also just lessons learned that you've just shared. Thank you for um, sharing that very just it's intuitive in so many ways, but at the same time, it's just a very practical way to manage your board as well. I'm conscious we're out of time, Martin, and I would love to keep going with this conversation, but I know that we're not able to. For those people that may want to reach out to Menslink, either to support your mission, or they have someone they know that could probably use your help locally, what's the best way for them to do that?
The best way is just to get on to our website, which is menslink.org.au.
And if someone wants to reach out to you personally, is it LinkedIn? Is that the best way to contact you?
LinkedIn is fine, or on our website, you just look for team members, and I'm there, and it's got my email address. You can email me directly. If you don't want to do that, you can just email me at martin@menslink.org.au.
Fantastic. Martin, the work that you guys do, your team does for young men in this community, I think is also a good representation of what other communities are dealing with. And I hope that people can see how this can actually support some of these other programs in different places around the world, and especially if they're working in the community sector and they are dealing with young men in any capacity whatsoever. It's really great to talk about those models. But some of the operational things you've shared with us are some really great lessons as well for how other executives might be able to implement some tools and ideas within their org. Thank you for the work for what you do. It certainly benefits the community that we both live in right now to help these young people, and the passion that you have for doing it because of your own personal experience, but just because of the time that you've spent there has definitely impacted those people as well as the community in general. So thanks for that work.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Tammy again. When I'm not doing podcast, I'm helping not-for-profits with IT decisions. The question for this week's IT in Plain English segment is, what is encryption? Encryption is basically a way to scramble data so that if the information got into the wrong hands, they can't read it. Your organization is likely already encrypting some data, such as credit card details when you process a donation or a purchase. In this case, the secure gateway on your website or the merchant terminal does this automatically. However, there is other data that you should consider encrypting as well, especially if you're sending it to an external party or vendor. Here are a few examples. Too often I see clients sending spreadsheets with privacy data from their CRMs. I also see emails with similar information embedded in the body of the email. Most disturbingly, I've actually seen documented cybersecurity vulnerabilities emailed to vendors. Should this information get into the wrong hands, not only could it hurt your brand reputation with stakeholders, there are also potentially other major consequences, such as a major cybersecurity threat and the loss of credit card merchant privileges due to the lack of PCI compliance. I've actually covered that topic in another episode. Fortunately, if you're a Microsoft 365 user, it is very easy to encrypt an email just by going to your Options tab. There are also tools within Microsoft and other vendors that allow you to easily share files that will be encrypted in transit, i.e., as it moves around the internet. So there you have it in plain English. If you have an IT question you want answered, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message. I just might answer it on the show. And if you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave me a review. To all of you executives with a cause, the world is definitely a better place because of you. Thank you for what you and your teams do every day.